everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration platform custom-built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. On today's show, we're talking to Tramell Isaac, an industry veteran with nearly 30 years in the business. Tramell takes us on a wild ride into the history of the industry with stories about working on the first two Fallout games and how many of the characters that remain ever present in the franchise are his original creations. Tramell also served as art director on the infamous Duke Nukem Forever and takes us behind the curtain at the decade-plus development cycle of the game and discusses his work as art director on the Planetside franchise. Before we begin, we had a couple of technical sound issues with this episode. It's not anything earth-shattering or it's going to ruin your listening experience, but there are a couple of dips in audio quality. We spent a lot of time trying to fix it. We'll do better next time. We apologize for any inconvenience this may cause, but this is the joy of doing a podcast in the remote world. So please enjoy this interview with Tramell, and I'll see you after the show. So Tramell, 30 years... At least 30 years, right? Or is it over 30 years?
Real close.
Almost 30 years in the industry. Looking back at everything to where you are now, what's kind of like the biggest leap forward? I mean, maybe not just in terms of technological advancement, but just the way developers work with each other.
Well, it's got to be, just the whole working from home situation. This is, it's obviously more recent, but, being able to try to navigate that environment has been challenging for a lot of people, especially larger companies. I think people are still grappling with the idea that, someday is going to get back to what we call normal. I'm extremely doubtful that that'll ever happen. So we'll see. But yeah, I think that's been the biggest change, like being able to, try to keep teams together, keep people engaged. It's out there that, people are quitting at an alarming rate. And I think it's mainly because it's just kind of a lack of connection. One day you could be at another company and then you can turn around and be at a different company the next day without lifting a finger. Truth be told, it's been extremely advantageous for people to quit and go to another job and get, an extra 20 to 30 grand right off the bat. So the competition is real stiff. So I think over the last 3-4 years, it's been extremely challenging.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I've been working pretty much since the pandemic. Got laid off initially, but when I did start working again, it's just been fully remote since then. And it's such like a stark contrast. I mean, I'm much more of not as big a fan of working from home. I mean, I think it has its benefits, of course. Nothing like, just rolling out of bed and going to the computer without having to deal with traffic and things like that, but just not being in the same place as people definitely wore on me over the years. And I'm sure, for you, having done business as long as you've done it in person, I mean, that'd be a big adjustment.
Yeah, it's been kind of rough. I, like yourself, I am not a fan of working from home at all. Not only that, it's just too easy to kind of get distracted. For me, I need spaces to mean something. When I was working at Ilphonic, they shut down, everything, but I was the only one still going into the office. I was in the office, 7,000 square foot office by myself for 2 years. And, my wife would be like, don't you feel weird about being, I'm like, nope. It meant something to me, like that space, like you keep those spaces sacred. This is how it works for me anyway. Prior to when I tried to make it work at home early in the process, and it just didn't. It felt weird because I was always looking at the clock and trying to figure out like, oh, is it time to quit? And I couldn't stand being in that room anymore. And the other byproduct was that is I realized that because I didn't want to go into that room, I didn't do any work after like I normally did. And, people listening to it maybe seem like it's a little weird to be even thinking that working after work is a big deal, but that's how you keep sharp. That's how you stay sharp. That's how you stay in this industry for almost 30 years, is to continue to work your skills, to hone your skills. And the only time I had to do that was after work.
you get going with a routine with pretty much everything in life, and for it to have that just totally taken away, it's like, I mean, places have a routine about them too. Like usually when I'm at home, I don't expect to be doing the things I'm doing at work. So yeah, it's just a weird thing for sure. But rewinding the clock a little bit, take me back to when you first started to get interested in art. How did that come about?
I was like 4 years old. I used to, doodle and scribble. And probably drawings back then was probably trash. My mom was very encouraging about, just me, doodling and drawing stuff. Like pretty much my whole family was. Even though looking back on it, like what I was doing was, like I said, it was probably garbage. But the fact that people were excited about me doing it, drawing things and, got me into it. And I just continued to do it, all the way up until I graduated, from art school. But yeah, I started off, just, drawing stuff and reading a bunch of Marvel comics and things like that. And that led me to, kind of get to the point where I started like painting and doing all kinds of different pottery and, oil painting, watercolors, gouache, you name it, pretty much doing it all. Went to school after high school to learn how to animate.
Any sort of formative comics or artists that really inspired you?
Oh yeah, plenty of them. Jim Lee, Walt Simonson, Mike Mignola, Silvestri, like all the greats. Every Saturday, all day looking at Thor and Iron Man and Spider-Man and, the Hulk.
Yeah.
Just all the time, just, looking at comics, collecting comics and, just admiring the work that they did.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was a hell of a run back then for sure. Did you ever feel like when you were, you continue to expand your artistic palette, definitely, getting into pottery and things like that beyond drawing, getting into watercolors and things like that. Did you ever feel like you hit a wall at some point before you decided to really go study animation and things like that? Or was this like 100% you wanted to just do something art related?
No, it wasn't really just a wall, because, by far I don't even call myself a master at any of those things. It's just, I was just interested in different stuff. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about anything art related. And yeah, it's like once I got to like my senior year in high school, I started taking computer courses in college. So it was, I had pretty much did all the art classes that they had in high school. There wasn't anything else, so I just started taking college courses. And that was just to get something different. So one was like an airbrush class and another was like a PC class. And even in the PC class, that wasn't anything new to me because I had already started dabbling on, with digital art on the Commodore 64.
Was your family still supportive of you continuing your pursuit of an artistic career?
Yeah, I mean, it never stopped. Like the only kind of pushback I got from my mom was when I graduated high school. And she was like, you need to go to a 4-year college. And, I wasn't a great student at school, period. I mean, let's just get that out there. And I hated high school. And I just wanted to get out and do my own thing. When I went to art school, my mom was like, she was really kind of, I think she was upset that I did that instead of going to a 4-year college like my brother did. And for me, I would much rather go somewhere where I was 100% sure that I wanted to go versus just going somewhere just because she said so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with a lot of kids because I was kind of the same way. I went to film school right out of high school, and my dad was very much on the side of you should go to a 4-year school, and then if you still want to do film, you can still take film as a minor, and then go to film school afterwards when you have like some more worldly experience. It was like, no, I gotta do this kind of thing. Like sometimes when you just have that passion, you just know that's what you got to do. That's what you have to pursue. Like if you don't do it, it's going to escape you somehow.
I mean, it's the time. It's time waits for nobody, right?
Right.
So life is hard enough without having a whole pile of regrets.
Okay, so where'd you go to school?
The Joe Kubert School was actually started as a comic book school.
Oh, cool.
And, a lot of great, artists would teach there or visit there and, do sessions and things like that. Great connections between Marvel and DC. And a bunch of the people that I graduated with ended up going into comics, but I actually went there for animation. But like the first 2 years were more graphic and sequential art, focus. So yeah, I went to school with, people who worked on Aquaman and, Sandman series, X-Men, Batman, the whole shebang. So, Punisher, a couple of friends who are, world renowned in that field, which is great because, I get to learn from them and got to, hang out and see their process. And, it was just a lot of late nights and a lot of tomfoolery going on up in there. It was a good experience mainly because it allowed me to get out of St. Louis and be able to see what the rest of, what the rest of the world had to offer, because we had students from all over the world, people from London and France and, Canada and, Mexico. I got to meet these people where I would have never had the opportunity when I was, living in the Midwest.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really enjoyed about my time at art school as well, was just you sort of get into this narrow bubble a little bit in terms of your own artistic sensibilities and what you think is great, and the things that influence you, that you're exposed to, but then you meet all these other people with different worldviews, particularly what you're talking about, internet people from different countries, not just from different places, but different countries. I mean, that the bonds you form in places like that, I mean, they stick with you and they impact you in a number of different ways. So yeah, I can't imagine, especially going to the school that you're talking about with all these renowned artists, went on to all these great things. I mean, that must have been a lot of fun and just a learning experience in and of itself beyond just the curriculum.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I mean, these were, when I'm at my high school, I'm like I would say probably one of the top artists at the high school. And then I go to this school and I'm just trash. And, just being around that kind of talent and, steel sharpens steel. A lot of the guys that I went to school with are, still to this day, way better than I am or ever would have been if I would have focused on just comics.
And so after school, what happened next?
I actually ended up, working on my portfolio for about a year. Video games wasn't really on my mind. I want to, do commercials and Saturday morning cartoons and maybe film and something like that. So, I was applying and reworking my reel and working on my portfolio for about a year and working 2 jobs. So it was like, it was all related. Like I worked at Blockbuster and I worked at an art store. So, at the art store, I was always buying paint, paper, and brushes. Anything I could get my hands on, half my paycheck would be gone by the time I walked out the door. Just, watching all the movies and stuff at Blockbuster, you get a couple free a week, but, always pick up something else just to, get more reference material in your mind. But, I did that for about a year and then finally landed a job, just happened to be the game industry. And, I've been playing games since I was 5. Since Pong came out, and I've had every system since then, so video games were just as necessary as, comics and Saturday morning cartoons and movies to me. When I got the opportunity, I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to do that.
Yeah. So who was that with?
It was a small startup called Tachyon Studios. It was like it started by some people who had worked at Sierra Online, because Sierra Online was pretty big at the time, but Sierra Online was like north of Fresno in this town called Oakhurst, in the middle of this valley that was like 15, 20 minutes south of Yosemite Park. So it was, definitely a culture shock for me going from St. Louis, moving to California, living in this tiny town. I think it maybe had 13,000 people in it. Nothing in between, nothing in between like Oakhurst and Fresno. So basically a bunch of smaller towns in between Fresno and Oakhurst. And then north of that was just, Yosemite. So we're just in the middle of this valley. But yeah, it was a great experience. I was there for about 2.5 years until that company folded.
What kind of stuff did you work on?
It was just animation, so it was all 2D, hand animated, sprite based. So we worked on a game called Blood and Magic, and it was a RTS made in the Dungeons and Dragons with the Dungeons and Dragons IP. So it was similar to Warcraft, but had the IP attached to it.
So what did you learn there really about, I mean, not even like team building, but just working with a team? Was this the first time you really worked with a team on a project?
Yeah, I mean, you do that in school a little bit, but it's completely different. It's like now you've got, your ideas that you want to bring to the table, but the reality is you're just, there to do your thing. For me, it's like work, just being in there, which is like, I needed to be a sponge. I was working all the time. And, learning as much as I possibly could. And, the game industry, this is before 3D. So it wasn't like, I'm still just learning the ropes, just trying to get, a portfolio that looks decent. Between like the first year and the second year, 3D started to become a little bit more prevalent in the game industry. And I just started learning that. And then from there, it was just kind of like every year there was something new to learn. Everything was changing.
So when 3D starts happening, what are like the first programs that start coming out where you can actually do 3D animation? Was that Maya, or was there something else?
It was my first program was 3D Studio. Learn to model and animate inside of that. Prior to that, it was all 2D programs like D-Paint, and there was another animation tool that we used as well. I forget the name of it right now, but it was mainly D-Paint Animator, which was kind of like it was a 256 paletted animation tool. So 256 palette, you only got 256 colors that you could work with. And I think maybe 14 of those you couldn't use at all because they were used for UI or something else. So it was very limited in its, in its use. But I mean, it was a good time to kind of learn that stuff and, being kind of like at the beginning of it all, really. Everything was kind of made in the same way. Like even like I think we were playing like Doom and Rise of the Triad at work. And those are all paletted games. So it's just kind of the same process. But even like the original Doom wasn't really 3D. It was kind of 3D-ish.
Yeah, sort of this hybrid thing. Yeah. So when did you go to Interplay after the first spot?
Yeah, I went to Interplay. I was actually contracted with them before I went there, like for real. And then when I got to Interplay, like prior to Interplay, I was actually doing all the death animations for the original for Fallout. And this was before it was even called Fallout. It was a Steve Jackson game. I don't know if you're familiar with Steve Jackson, but he made this role-playing system, and it was an IP game, based on his role-playing system. So at the time, I was just working on that and doing all the death animations. So they would render out the deaths, but all of like the little details were done by hand. So I would go in and put like bones and, like blood trails and extra bits on the deaths to kind of like jazz them up, make them a lot more gory. And I did that as a contractor prior to actually working at Interplay. So then when that company shut down, I ended up going to Interplay because I, had a good rapport with the people down there. I think my first assignment officially at Interplay was to design the Vault Boy.
Oh, really?
Yep.
So did you design the Vault Boy on your own, or did you work with anybody on that?
Well, they had an initial idea of it and like a kind of almost like a napkin sketch of him.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the first version of Mickey Mouse almost.
Right.
So it didn't look like what he looks like now. What he looks like now is based on my design.
Wow.
Leonard Boyarsky had the idea. He was like, I wanted to kind of resemble the Monopoly guy. And Tim Kaine was, driving some of the ideas behind it as well. And then they just gave me, the parameters and what, kind of like the personality of this character. And I, came up with him.
How does that feel now, knowing that design is still so relevant and it really is like what you think of? Like it's for me, that's like what I think of when I think of Fallout. So
Everybody wants to do something to leave a mark on the world in some way, right? Be it positive or negative. At least I've done something that can be recognized, in a lot of different, settings. So, I'm proud of that part.
so what's it like working at Interplay? How did that change like culturally from where you were before? What was the dynamic like there?
I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun working at Interplay, and like it's such a great group of people. And I worked my ass off. I worked really hard when I was there, and it wasn't like this goes beyond like even the conversation of, oh, shouldn't be working that much, that many hours. I didn't even care because it was so much fun. Like I couldn't wait to get done with with one task and move on to the next one. And I was just having a blast. So didn't matter. I was easily working 70, 80 hours a week.
But you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm getting paid for this. Like that's how I felt. But when you look back on it, ultimately you probably, talk about hour for hour, you probably making about as much as the next person at McDonald's. But I don't think I have any really bad memories of Interplay at all. Like it was always something fun to do.
Really tight knit group. It sounds like too.
Yeah, I mean it was. I mean people was coming and going, but still, like the talent that was there was just immense. I'm like in my third year, so I'm trying to soak up as much as I possibly could. So at this time, I'm learning like three different programs, three different 3D programs, and working. And I had like three computers in my office and a couch, of course, so I can take a nap, wake up, and go back to it. And it was it's just nuts. Plenty of times I spent the night up in there working on stuff. But Fergus and Darren Monahan and Brian Menzies and like all these guys, used to have Tim Donnelly, used to have big fun. We play games of Quake and just had a blast.
Yeah, there's not much better than when you're working on something with a group of people and y'all just love each other and love hanging out and doing the work and also having fun together. Sounds great. Did you work on the opening cinematic on Fallout 1?
I did.
That stuck with me for a while and how well done it is. And so like a lot of people will talk about, the direction in games, around that time, like Metal Gear Solid and things like that. And I'm a huge Metal Gear fan myself, but I mean that opening cinematic alone, of just the propaganda on the TV and the pullout from that to the shot of the nuclear wasteland while the TV is still playing. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. It sets the tone beautifully. Can you talk about how that sequence came about?
How it came about, I mean, I think it's mostly Leonard Boyarsky and Jason Anderson working through that. I'm not really sure how I weaseled my 2D skills into that, but I did somehow. I think my portion of it was kind of a testament to what I had just done. Just graduated not too long after that. Still kind of keeping my animation skills sharp, and then transition. It was like a transition because some of that stuff was actually 2D drawn over 3D. And a combination. And the Vault Boy was all 2D. It was a combination of the two, but it was kind of almost in a lot of ways rotoscoped over the top of 3D to make it feel like a cartoon. So for me, it was just like, oh man, I get to be a part of this because it was such a big deal. And it was something that they had already kind of established, and just being able to, add any kind of influence to it was, it's an honor. Yeah, I was just happy that I got to participate in any kind of way.
Yeah, the last shot, especially like when the camera finally stops, it reminds me of like the opening of Godfather 1, kind of the whole "I believe in America" monologue, and it slowly just pulls back. But when it stops, like the city, yeah, it kind of has this sort of almost like a matte painting kind of feel to it. Such a great image. Great shot. Great overall just opening to a game. So then Fallout 2 comes like right on the heels of that, right? That's like 9 months after Fallout 1.
Right after Fallout was done, there's a little bit of downtime and where Tim and Leonard basically were trying to figure out like what the story was going to be for 2. I had moved on to work on this game called Descent to Undermountain, which was a game that had languished in production hell for a long time. If you look at the credits list, if you ever dare to open it up, literally every artist in Black Isle at the time listed on that thing, because at some point in time they had rotated in and rotated back out. And I remember Fergus came to me and was like, while we're waiting on Fallout 2 to get spun up, I want you to get this game out the door. And I was like, all right, cool. Because, challenge, whatever, challenge accepted. When Fergus asked me to do that, I was like, all right, cool. Didn't even really care what the team makeup was. It was like me and like 3 other people. It's like a producer and a designer, maybe, and a couple of programmers. I just did it. Figure out what's missing, fill in the blanks, do that work. I had to do, a bunch of stuff. Like as bad of a game as it was, and it was like, I think PC Gamer gave it to kind of listed it as, back in the day as one of the worst games ever made. Just hilarious. But as bad as it was a great experience for me, because that was the first time I actually got to see like all of the facets that are required to make a game and get it out the door. You're doing VFX and, rigging and animating and texture work, character work, UI work, doing like, some paintings for, like transition paintings, different renders and things like that. I think that game, regardless of how bad it was, taught me a lot. I learned a lot on that game.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot bigger than Fallout 1 for sure.
Yeah, it was a much bigger role as far as like my participation in it, having to put it all together and make sure that it could get in the box. And of course, obviously didn't do enough because it was trash.
And you came in like the middle of development on that, right?
It was the end.
It was the end. So that's even tougher.
So I think the game had been left for dead. And it was like, we just need to get it out the door. Can you finish it up? I was like, all right, cool, let's go. And you don't get opportunities like that. You probably never will, because it's just not, the game industry is not, games just aren't made like that anymore.
And so then you go back to Fallout 2, right after that?
Right after that, I got done with that. They were ready with Fallout 2, and took on a lead role in Fallout 2. Was able to do a little bit of everything on that one as well. Worked on the intro again, did some character design, some rendering, some animation, character creation. A lot of a number of the characters that are still being used today are mine, that I created. Robo Brain, that's mine. Robo Dog Meat, Frank Harrigan, and a couple others that are in there. The geckos, all of the different versions of the geckos, Flaming Gecko, all of those are my creations. So yeah, it was fun. Like, we had a really good time.
Is your like confidence growing at this point now that you're getting like a lead role and you worked on the first Fallout, you knock out Fallout 2? Do you feel like, all right, now like what's the next challenge? It just feels like very driven, super high work ethic, passion for what you do. You learn how to do it, you knock it out. So now that you're getting into like lead roles, are you ready to just take on the world after that?
I thought I was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And, that was the reason why I ended up leaving. I thought I was better than I was. In some regards, I probably was due to, expand myself. But it was, for me, I was chasing this dream of being an art director for no real reason. And I say no real reason because it was like, when I got into the industry, I was like, I want to be an art director, not knowing what the hell that meant. It took me from the time that I got into about 7 years in to get an art director job. I wasn't fully prepared for doing that. And it was just that ego was driving me. When in reality, I had no idea what I was doing. And when I went from Fallout 2 to it was just like, oh, we just need some animations. You need you to animate and build some characters for Icewind Dale. I don't know. I kind of took it the wrong way. Like I took it like, oh, now I'm just animating again. And I look back on it and I know Fergus was probably like, this dude, I can't do nothing with this guy. I can't make him happy. It was time to go. And because of my, kind of blinders and stupidity, I messed up a opportunity that probably could have changed my life.
So what was that?
So like when I was working on Icewind Dale, I don't think I've ever told this story in public. So you got this exclusive.
Oh, wow. I'm excited to hear it.
I was interviewing at different places. So I had these 2 trips planned. One was in Maryland and one was in Austin. And this company, in between, like right before I was about to go on these interviews, and this was back when you had to fly out, fly to a location.
Right. No Zoom interviews.
Yeah, and talk to them in person and actually go through the motions and all that stuff. And like I had this narrow window in between. So the way that it would have worked out, I was like, fly out on Sunday or something like that, interview on Monday, fly back to Orange County on Tuesday, and then like on Thursday I would fly to Austin and interview on Friday and then fly back that evening. So I had like this, really narrow window, and the company was like, hey, don't take a job until we get to talk to you. I was like, I can't promise you that.
I made Vault Boy, damn it.
I'm a Vault Boy creator. You can't tell me to wait. So they said, all right, well, we'll pay for your whole trip. Don't even use those other tickets. We'll pay for you to go to Maryland, come here, fly you to Texas, and then fly you back home. I was like, all right, cool. So did it. And again, like I was saying, like my idea of what so-called success looked like was, oh, you need to be an art director. And the position that they were offering was just, another animator. And in my mind, I was like, I don't even want to deal with that no more. I don't want to be that anymore. I want to be, climbing the ladder and all this other jazz. When the reality is, I wasn't really looking at it. I was looking at what I wanted as opposed to what I needed. I passed on them after, I won't get into the details of that, but ended up passing on them. And that company was Epic Games.
Oh, man.
But I got to meet Cliff and Tim back when they were just kids, man.
Right.
And it just wasn't what I was looking for. And had I just been a little bit more humble and just recognizing what I was good at, which at the time I was a pretty decent animator. I think animation was where I needed to be. And I could have been retired like 5-6 times over by now.
Did you learn anything from that and the sort of the after? Was there a time when you woke up like, I don't know, 3-6 months later and you were like, well, shit, I should have taken that or anything like that? Or did you just keep marching forward?
Oh, no. Yeah, there's definitely a time soon after that, I went to Texas where I was like, damn.
Yeah.
This was a bad idea. I ended up being down there for maybe a year. And then that's when I went from there to Sony to work on the original Planetside.
So before we go into Planetside, because I definitely want to talk about that, particularly too. I think the work on that's pretty amazing from you and that entire team. I gotta ask some Duke Nukem Forever questions.
Okay.
Because that's such a project that fascinated the industry and gamers especially alike, I think, in terms of the mystique surrounding it.
Yeah.
Right. So everybody knows who's probably listening to this. I went through extreme development hell. you were part of the 3D Realms team, and it had already been in active development for a minute, right?
I think it might have been in development maybe 10 years prior to me getting there.
So when you get there, yeah, it started development, I think, in the 90s. When you get there, what's the morale like on that team? I mean, I'm sure a lot of them had been working on it forever. I heard that plenty of people had left at that point just because like this was like the only 3D game that they had worked on. They had nothing for their portfolio. They had been in absolute development hell. So what are you walking into when you sign up with them?
It was like 50-50 on the morale. Like some people was like, oh, kind of is what it is and rolling with it. And then other people were just like pissed about being kind of stuck in this environment. And, so to rewind it a little bit, how I got introduced to George, who was one of the co-owners of 3D Realms, George and Scott actually, was through Cliff Blazinski. After I interviewed at Epic, me and him kept in touch. And, he introduced me to George through this, this is back when we were all kind of posting on forums and we, interact and ask questions and do, talk about the game industry on this forum. And, so I got to talking to George, and this was well before I even thought about working there. This was like in 2000 somewhere. So I didn't actually start working with George until like 2006. So like 5-6 years prior to working on Duke, I had been talking to George, just shooting the shit, no big deal. And I think I was down there for like a convention, anime convention down in Dallas or something. And I stopped by and George was like, oh yeah, you should come check out the game. I was like, yeah, I gotta see that. Because it's the spectacle of it all. I was like, this better be, something. But so at the time, they had like all of these kind of parts and pieces, but no like consolidated game. But like it was just like a bunch of really cool small vignettes. So like you play in pool and had these a lot of physics puzzles and this water physics thing that was just ridiculous. They had a lot of really cool technical achievements in that. And I was like, man, that's pretty dope. I think it might have been like shortly after that. I was like, all right, man, let's I think his art director at the time was like, I'm done with this. So, we linked up and, that's how it kind of happened. And then when I got there, there was still some people, that were kind of upset with George because they were blaming him for the delays and because it wasn't good enough. And I think a couple people quit. I ended up firing a dude and replacing them with people who just wanted to get it done and wanted to do a really good job at it. And that team, once we built that team, that was the team that ultimately shipped it when it was all said and done, even after Gearbox took it. Gearbox took it maybe like 2 years after we had stopped working on it, but I would say probably a good 70% of the content that was in that build was stuff that we had did before. When I got there, the game was like 15, almost 20 hours long. And I think they cut it down to maybe 12. I don't know what they actually shipped because I never played the shipped product.
I remember playing it and I didn't think it was as bad as everyone said it was.
It probably was.
It probably like it wasn't great, but like people were acting like it was like the worst game ever made. I was like, I played much worse games.
No,
than this.
Because it needed to be the greatest thing.
Of course it did, because it was like
the biggest problem.
15 years in development.
That was the biggest problem, that it couldn't exceed the hype. It would have had to be a 10 out of 10 in order for it to even matter.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I just knew because I've been in development that long. I was like, there's no way this is going to be like... Maybe it's also just because I went into it with extremely low expectations. I think that was probably helpful in terms of my reception of it. But what have you learned at this point about setting up like how things should function within your team? Take me through like how you set up an art team to be successful.
Around this period of time was more about like building a team, kind of building to fill the holes. So the first go round was me thinking I knew what I was doing, but didn't. And, creating a team based on just my flawed logic. So that was a failure in my eyes. And the Planetside 1 team, I directed that team like I was them. At that point in time, I was, capable of doing everything on that project, and I did. Where it came from, character modeling or setting up, doing technical art or doing, rigging and, animation or VFX. I could do all of that stuff. And ultimately, I ended up doing all of that once they, scaled down the team. I had the ability to do it all. And because of that, and because of the way that I worked, my drive, my expectations for them were the same as they were for me. And that, only works with certain personality types. If people are the same as you, then yeah, it would work. But for people who work differently, which are probably a lot of people.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask how that translated.
I ended up hurting some feelings for sure. But the one thing for sure out of that, I would say a good 80% of the people that I work with on that art team and even on the programming team, I believe have a good amount of respect for me because we're still friends to this day. And, we can, have a conversation about the so-called good old days at any point in time. So I don't think I was that hard on folks, but I do know that, at that point in time, my management style was, still development and developing. And I was, wasn't for everybody. And, fresh off of that, going into Neverwinter Nights, I think it was more the same in a lot of ways. But, when I went to Obsidian, thinking that it would be like old times, like, so most of the people that worked there at the time were all from Interplay. Saying you can never go back home. It's true. You never go back home. And it felt weird because now everybody that I knew and worked with were in, different positions and, had different responsibilities. And I couldn't understand that, why it felt so cold at the time. And even when I had interviewed, like a recurring theme throughout my career has always been to come in and fix stuff. So I remember interviewing for Neverwinter Nights prior to them hiring the person that they hired. Person that they hired didn't work out. They had a bunch of problems with him. I talked to Fergus again. He was like, "Hey man, we need your help." I was like, "All right, cool." When Fergus calls, you go, right? And because it's the same thing, like with the Center Undermount. Fergus was like, "Man, I need you to finish this thing." I was like, "All right, man, I got you." But my conversation with him on the phone at the time, when we were discussing that, was like, "You know how I work, and are you cool with that?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'm good." So at the time, it was kind of like balls to the wall. Let's do it. We got to get this thing shipped. So anything that transpired after that was just kind of in that mentality. But for the people that it did work for, I ended up hiring those people on Duke Nukem Forever.
Because the game had already been in development so long, did you go into it kind of like thinking about changing anything in terms of the aesthetic, or was it just kind of like, we need to just finish this sort of deal?
No, it was a lot of stuff that had to be redone. Like all the characters got redone. Some environments got, juiced up a little bit. They ended up hiring this guy who was not from the game industry at all. He had an architecture background. And he helped us a lot with just getting, buildings and stuff like that and spaces to feel real, as opposed to gamey. So he was a huge help. And then, Mark Skelton, who was, had worked at Blizzard for a while, really talented character artist, came in and helped, take all the creatures and stuff and put them on, just take them to the next level. And Randy Forsythe, he was amazing character artist that I had hired when I was at right out of school, when I was working on Neverwinter Nights. He came through and, ended up joining the team as well. And, Ben Oaf, who, currently now works at Epic, he was, a really big help. But we ended up hiring a bunch of people who were just extremely talented. And then there was a bunch of people who were there that hadn't really blossomed or hadn't had the ability to shine. And, Chris Smith, who's I think working at CIG right now, he was one of those people. He was just, super talented modeler. Chris DeSimone, again, like it's a bunch of people that were just like extremely talented.
You worked on it for a couple years?
From 2006 to 2009.
Okay. And so at that point, that's when 3D Realms goes under, right?
They shut it down. Yeah, shut it down.
Because then, like, they acquired by Take-Two, or Take-Two was putting pressure on them to like finish the game.
I think later, after they shut down, Gearbox bought 3D Realms, or I think they bought just Duke Nukem. I'm not really sure what the details are for that. Yeah, Take-Two was always, trying to pressure George and Scott to hurry up because they were funding it themselves and they had plenty of dough. They was always telling Take-Two to back off.
Right. That's one of the most fascinating part about that story to me is that they were funding it themselves for that long, for like 14, 12 years of development, whatever it was, like unreal.
Which, I mean, I think all of this could have been avoided. Like a lot of this stuff could have been avoided the way it ended up had George believed in the team enough to let us know what the situation was. So we didn't know we was running out of dough. I mean, we didn't know until it was too late. It's mad late. But the game was in a good spot at the time where if we had known, which I'm sure they knew, we've had known like 7-8 months before, we probably would have got the game out. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but the part of the team actually stayed on after 3D Realms shut down to try to finish the game by themselves without pay because they believed in it that much. And I think one of the things that George was concerned about is like, if I tell them, then everybody's just going to quit. The reality of it was that nobody probably would have quit. Everybody would have just doubled down and got it done and probably would have shipped the game. And we probably have a different story for today, but he just didn't have that for whatever reason. He just didn't trust that the team would rally in that way, but they did. And, by the time Gearbox got it, I believe that group had been working on it maybe 8-9 months by themselves.
Man, that is true belief in a project to continue that. It's admirable. All right, so that's that's Duke Nukem. Man, what a story. So I definitely want to talk about Planetside 2. That's a hell of a shooter, I gotta say, in terms of what you guys accomplished.
It'll be 10 years in November.
Yeah, still going strong.
They just released a patch, underwater patch, which was a major update for them a couple months ago.
How long was development on that one?
That was 18 months from scratch. No engine, no nothing.
Right, because the first one came out like a decade before that or something, right?
Yeah, it came out 2003, something like that.
2003, yeah. So yeah, obviously you gotta have a new engine at that point. Yeah. So at this point, right, when you come on board, what changes in terms of your art direction, management style, in terms of what you're doing? Are you still getting your hands dirty with everybody, or are you? Because
we were moving at such a pace that was, probably wasn't, necessary or needed, but, in order to get something out in 18 months without any idea whether or not this thing is going to see the light of day, yeah, you kind of move with some kind of level of importance. So yeah, I was getting my hands dirty. I was making stuff and, building things and making textures and doing all kind of stuff in that engine. So, yeah, I think it's really the only way to go to when you're asking people to do difficult things. It's hard to have to be sitting on the sideline while they do those difficult things, because I wouldn't tell nobody to do anything that I wouldn't be willing to do.
Yeah, and I think that's got to rally them to want to work harder, right?
Hopefully they say, let me go, pitch in. But yeah, I never want to be that guy that's just like, oh, go do this thing and I'm gonna go sit here and rest. It's always been let's go do it. And I think by this time, management wise, it was less about what I wanted them to do, or less about what I expected them to do based on my performance. It was a lot more fun the second time around, actually. Just the interaction with the players, interaction with the community, just kind of like when Twitch is just brand new and just kind of dealing with streaming and reaching out and touching different types of people in communities and stuff like that and having conversations with them. It was a different way of managing when it's all said and done. Like I think Planetside 2 was probably the most relaxed and natural that I've ever felt in that role.
Well, yeah, I'm curious. Take me through like if you're setting up like assets, like props, environment art to be done. What's the order of the day when you're figuring out all the things your team needs to make? How do you set it all up? I'm just interested in your process of all that. I mean, from whatever title you want to think of, I really just want to know how the sausage is made.
I mean, it all starts with concepts. Prior to that is all about the design, what the expectations are for any particular level. So like with Planetside 2, it was more about designing a whole map and figuring out what that map looked like across 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers.
Because you're dealing with thousands of players, right?
Yeah, we're dealing with thousands of players. And then, of course, you got to, each map has to feel a certain way. So you want it to have a different feel when you're playing on it. So it's just not all desert or all just, rock or all green grass. So it's more about like figuring out, okay, if design's saying, okay, this is an ice map. Okay, what on this map can we do to make it interesting visually and still keep that same flavor of what it needs to be? And that's where the concepts and stuff come in. You start concepting it out, and then you start building based on design elements. Because even though that the map is massive, you still have to be concerned about like sight lines and blockers and things like that. And that's when design is coming in and creating pathways and choke points and things like that, trying to corral people into different scenarios or force them into different conflicts. And even then, like a lot of stuff falls by the wayside when you actually get real people on the map and then you see where they actually go. Then we gotta kind of change things up, but it all starts with kind of a blockout mesh, and then we art from there. With those maps, we had like a limited amount of textures that we could use specifically for the map itself. The buildings were already kind of had their own texture footprint that they occupied. So a lot of things we didn't really have to worry about when it came to that, but it was more about like making sure that the flora on those maps, complemented it or actually added some more flavor to what we were doing. Maps, the swamp maps and things like that, and water, and having like sight lines that make great screenshots, extremely important for marketing, things like that. So yeah, it was always just kind of at the front of my mind. It's like, okay, what can we put in this map that's gonna sell it? So yeah, it all starts kind of like at the very beginning where you're like, here's the concept of the thing, let's draw it out, and then you start building your texture sets and start laying it out.
What about like for animation wise? Does it follow for you a pretty similar pattern in terms of concepts, mesh, rig, etc.? Is there more involvement there with creative directors, things like that? How does that play out?
Yeah, animation is a little different because it kind of touches all the groups. So like how you build a character needs to be approved by animation. Because if it doesn't, if it's not rigged properly and doesn't fold, things don't bend right, then it's just not going to look right. So just, being in constant contact with animators and the riggers to make sure that we're building the stuff the right way, starting off with block meshes and things like that and getting kind of a good idea of what's supposed to, to be flexible, what's not supposed to be flexible, getting all the rules set prior, and then going off on it and actually building it for real. I think animation is kind of uh, one of those groups that kind of live in between everything because they have to touch a lot of things. When it comes to weapons or characters or vehicles,
Yeah.
They're involved in pretty much every step of the way. So like, if you could be a, environment artist and you never really have to deal with anybody, right? You're just making rocks or making structure pieces or, making textures all day long and people take those textures and do things with them. But animation is kind of, they have to be involved in order for anything to look right on screen.
So tell me what you think about in terms of where the industry is headed in terms of AI, in terms of the way that assets are generated, textures. Seems like we're entering kind of a strange new world where it's less manual and more automated in almost everything.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I would say probably in the next three years, we're going to probably do away with the fact that we have to do mundane stuff. And I think artists on teams will be focused more on creative endeavors than they would be like, oh, I need you to make a desk. And it's like, well, you know, at the present time, you can kind of go get any desk off the marketplace or get one off of Turtle Squid or whatever. Like you can find these things, these more mundane, more day-to-day type stuff, less fantastic stuff, anywhere, right? So I think, right now they've got, demonstrations of um, AI building 3D meshes. I think what's going to happen is we'll have people that just create prompts all day. So I need a Victorian chair with red velvet and gold filigree. You type in those prompts and then it generates a mesh for you, and the unwrap. So like all of the things that people hate doing, like unwrapping and
Right. With the UVs.
yeah, look at this chair I made in my portfolio. Nobody cares about the damn chair in your portfolio. Like all of that stuff is going to be, I think, is going to be done by AI, which it should be because you can spend your time working on set pieces that actually change the fabric of the game. They, like I said, they're already doing that now in kind of experimental phases. I think in the next 3 years it'll be more like Midjourney is now or DALL-E is now, where you can just type in a prompt and it'll build you whatever thing that you want.
Do you worry about like something like that kind of like way in the future, taken away from even doing like character models and things like that?
Do I worry about it? No, these technologies will exist or coexist with game development. Just it'll change how you work. I think it's the more creative things that people are afraid of.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm kind of wondering about because like all these incredible character models that people are able to come up with. I would just hate if like the human element was lost out. Like a bed, a desk, a chair, so be it. But something that really, pulls at the soul would be something I would be afraid to lose with something like that.
I think that's probably coming too. So I'd probably give it 5 to 7 years before they're generating characters based on just straight concepts. I don't think there'll ever be a make game button. Still got to make the game. I think just the makeup of the team will, go from, maybe, from 80 to 90 people down to maybe 50 people.
Well, it's a crazy time we're living in, and Tramell, I think that's going to wrap us up. But thank you so much for stopping by and talking with us. This was fantastic hearing about your journey and all these incredible titles you worked on, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
No, man, appreciate it. Thanks for choosing me to do this. Hopefully somebody got something educational out of this whole conversation for sure.
All right, that's going to wrap up our show. We want to thank Tramell again for being our guest this week. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our Discord. Thank you as always for listening, and we'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.